The prairie wind moved like a vast ocean across the tall grass, bending it in silver-green waves beneath a sky the color of faded ash. Onawa stood at the edge of her homestead, her dark hair unbound, her shawl caught in the restless breath of evening. The land stretched endless and empty, yet it never felt quiet to her. Every gust carried whispers, ancestral, haunting, as if the earth itself remembered what she longed to forget. For years she had lived in silence, wealthy by inheritance but poor in companionship, her days strung together like beads of solitude. She told herself she did not need more than the land, the river, and the sky. But deep inside, some unanswered part of her stirred whenever the wind rushed through the cottonwoods. Was she waiting for something, or for someone who had already passed through her life like a storm she could not hold? 2 years earlier, when the river ran swollen with rain, Onawa's horse had spooked at a rattlesnake and cast her into the rushing current. She remembered the fierce pull of the water, the cold that stole her breath, the certainty that she would never rise again. And then, arms as unyielding as carved stone had lifted her, dragged her to shore, wrapped her in a coat still warm with another's life. That man had spoken little, only asking if she could stand, but his presence had burned into her with the sharpness of lightning. His name was Amos Callahan. She never saw him again, and yet she lived with the memory as though he lingered in the corners of her cabin, watching, waiting. Sometimes she woke from dreams with her heart racing, half expecting to see him by her hearth. But always there was only silence, and the wind pressing its cool lips to her windows. On this night, as the horizon blushed with stormlight, a sound broke her solitude, a heavy knock at the door. Startled, she drew the shawl tighter and opened it to find 2 men, shadows vast and dark against the rain-swollen sky. Both were giants, shoulders filling the doorway, water streaming from wide-brimmed hats. The younger, with eyes gray as a storm cloud, removed his hat politely and inclined his head. The elder, broader still, carried himself with a kind of guarded authority. "Evenin', ma'am," the younger said, voice low, deliberate. "Name's Amos. This is my brother, Silas. We've been caught by the storm. Might we rest here the night?" Her breath caught. Though 2 years had passed, she knew him instantly, knew the cut of his jaw, the quiet gravity of his stance. Yet he looked at her without recognition, as though she were no more than a stranger. She stepped back and allowed them inside, the storm's roar following before she shut the door fast. The cabin filled with the scent of wet leather and rain. Her pulse beat quick and hot in her throat. Could he truly not remember? Or did he choose not to? The fire snapped in the hearth as she set out bread and beans. The 3 sat at her rough-hewn table. Conversation was scarce. Silas ate with blunt efficiency, his sharp eyes flicking between her and his brother, as though weighing some unspoken risk. Amos moved with quiet restraint, offering food toward her first, straightening a candle that leaned, careful with every gesture as though the world might judge him harshly for taking up too much space. Onawa found herself watching his hands, scarred, large, yet oddly gentle in their movements. She wondered if he knew how much presence he carried, how easily he unsettled the stillness of her home. Why did he hold himself as if ashamed of his size, of his very being? The storm rose through the night, shaking the cabin walls, rattling shutters. Silas retired early to the floor near the door, hat pulled low, trusting no one and nothing. Amos remained by the fire. Onawa, restless, lingered across from him. Shadows bent around his face, sharpening the lines of cheek and jaw. She dared to ask, her voice softer than the storm outside, "Do you recall a girl by the river 2 years ago? A horse threw her. A man pulled her out." His spoon stilled. He lifted his eyes to her slowly, and something flickered there. Recognition, yes, but also a weight that pressed down like stone. "I recall," he said, after a long pause. "No more." He stared back at the fire, as if words cost him too dearly. Silence stretched, thick and unsaid. Before retreating to the corner where he would sleep, he added another log to the fire, its warmth spreading first to her and then to him. Even silence, when shared, can be louder than words. At dawn, the storm passed. The brothers saddled their horses, preparing to ride on. As they stepped from her porch, a wagon of neighbors creaked by on the road, slowing just enough to take in the sight. A native woman alone, Cowboys leaving her cabin at daybreak. She felt their judgment pierce her like cold rain, whispering of impropriety, of scandal. Yet she did not feel shame, only a trembling aliveness, as though the night had returned something long missing. Amos tipped his hat politely, his voice distant, almost formal. "Thank you kindly, ma'am." Silas glanced back only once, protective, wary. And then they were gone, two towering figures swallowed by prairie dust. She thought it was the end, but endings often disguise beginnings. Weeks passed in quiet routine, yet her eyes sought the horizon as though expecting a shape to appear. One evening, she returned from tending her fields to find Amos in her yard, reins in one hand, mending her fence without being asked. He said little, only nodded, his movements deliberate, careful, steady. She watched him work until the sun bled out across the horizon. The next day he came again, wordless, fixing a roof shingle loosened by the storm. The day after, he carried water for her horses. He asked nothing in return. And yet his presence, unspoken, was the thing she had hungered for without admitting it. Still, gossip grew like weeds. Some neighbors hinted she was reckless, letting a cowboy linger. Others eyed Amos with suspicion, his size and quiet nature turning admiration into fear. Onawa bore it with silent dignity, but she wondered how much longer he could endure being unwelcome, misunderstood. One evening, as they sat by the firelight again, Amos spoke at last. His voice carried a rough edge, as though dragged from the depths of shame. "Most folks see me and reckon I don't belong. Too tall, too rough, too much. I keep my head down, keep movin'. World don't want men like me settlin'." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw the vulnerable truth behind them. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his with deliberate softness. "In my eyes," she whispered, "you are not too much. You are enough, exactly as you are." He stared at her hand, then at her face, as if the words were more gift than he had ever been offered. He did not speak, but the silence between them had changed shape. It no longer felt empty, but full, holding a promise neither dared to name aloud. When the next storm rolled across the plains, wind howling through the cracks of her cabin, Amos did not retreat to his corner. He remained by her side, his hand finding hers as thunder shook the sky. No declaration, no grand speeches, only his hand over hers, steady, and her head leaning against the breadth of his chest. It was enough. It was everything. The long wait, the quiet ache, had resolved in this single gesture of belonging. Love had always been waiting at her door, disguised as a man who thought himself unworthy. Years later, when they were married and the land had become theirs together, she would look back on that night as the true beginning. Their life was not a tale of grand adventure, but of small acts of grace, mending fences side by side, planting, enduring seasons, holding fast through silence and storm alike. It was the kind of love that did not roar like thunder but glowed like embers, steady and warm. And perhaps, dear soul who listens to this tale, you will hear the lesson the prairie wind once carried to me, that love does not always arrive in fire or in glory, but in the quiet weight of a hand that stays, in the presence of one who sees you as enough. Remember this. Sometimes the one you wait for is already closer than you know, waiting at the threshold of your solitude, asking only to come in from the storm.